were a lot more vocal in the challenges that they saw, and they had more challenges running compliance and governance as they expanded. Think about this, right? Even here in Canada, Ontario has different data governance laws, Quebec has different data governance laws, and as you start scaling that up, you're thinking of, FedRAMP in the US, Protected in Canada, GDPR in Europe. So if you're a business that's trying to scale up, how do you make sure you understand these challenges? And that's what you see with the leaders, right? Tend to be the ones that have a streamlined process. They have fewer decision makers with more power that allows them to act fast, act swift, but at the same time, get the right people in place. So you need agility, and decision paralysis usually, and bureaucracy usually is not the best friend of velocity. So leaders who create an environment where ideas accelerate naturally rather than dying in a committee seem to be leaders in this space. Inventorying applications, your applications and assets. Again, once you know where you're modernizing and once you know what needs to be modernized, that's almost a big battle that you're trying to win. And justifying new investment, right? Again, for everybody that's ever worked in security, budget is never enough, right? No matter what you get, it's not good enough because you need more. You need the latest, the greatest, the newest tools. But I think the successful leaders and the organizations that have been really useful in navigating this have found that you might have to find ways to balance the accounts book. So while you need funding in one aspect of your business, you might need to find ways to balance that out. Attack surface is unprotected. Again, as your developers are building new products, there are new projects, which means the attack surface of your application, your organization, your enterprise is extending beyond just, we used to have just SaaS applications and on-prem applications, but now we have agents, we have MCP servers. How do you ensure all of them continue to be supported in a unified way? That's a question as a security organization you need to keep thinking about. And the last one, which is maintenance versus building. How do you ensure your developers have the right mix of being able to build the coolest, latest, greatest, but at the same time, you're also giving a consistent, reliable experience, which means maintenance. This is really where eventually, I want to talk about Cloudflare, the organization that I work for the folks that don't know what Cloudflare is. At any point in time, we see over 20% of the internet's traffic going through the Cloudflare platform. We run a massive global platform. And what that allows us to do is, for anybody thinking about application modernization, decision paralysis tend to be the ones that have a streamlined process. They have fewer decision makers with more power that allows them to act fast, act swift, but at the same time, get the right people in place. So you need agility, and decision paralysis usually, and bureaucracy usually is not the best friend of velocity. So leaders who create an environment where ideas accelerate naturally rather than dying in a committee seem to be leaders in this space. The next one is the tinkering and transforming. While everybody is using AI and the newest technology, the level and the appetite of risk is significantly different for each user. And if you can't really see all the way from the back, all it's saying is, about 72% of the leaders expect a massive change in the budget. And at the same time, about 98% of the leaders anticipate a budget increase for application modernization next year, right? And that's, opposed to a relatively smaller number when it comes to the non-leaders. Again, the intent here is dive in, dive strong, know what you're trying to build, and tying that back to your previous point, as long as there's operational efficiency and non-decision paralysis, they all sort of blend in with each other. And then finally, scalability as a challenge for leaders. Now, this is an interesting chart because right off the top, it might not seem like there's a big difference between both the leaders and the non-leaders. But what's interesting is we've seen that when the leading organizations are thinking about global deployments, and again, global is relative, right? For an application that is local to like Toronto downtown, global could be all of Canada. But for somebody that's running a Canadian business, global could be the rest of the world, right? So it's how you scale based on your business operations. What we started seeing is the leaders were a lot more vocal in the challenges that they saw, and they had more challenges running compliance and governance as they expanded. Think about this, right? Even here in Canada, Ontario has different data governance laws, Quebec has different data governance laws, and as you start scaling that up, you're thinking of, FedRAMP in the US, Protected B in Canada, GDPR in Europe. So if you're a business that's trying to scale up, how do you make sure you understand these challenges? And that's what you see with the leaders, right? The leaders are saying, look, we find it difficult to manage because these are actual challenges, and that's okay. They're calling that out as challenges. So, right. So in terms of agility at scale, the key sort of takeaways is ensure you work with, obviously, your leadership across your organization to ensure you identify inefficiencies, roadblocks, etc. Again, this seems obvious at this point in time, but sometimes just calling it out, challenges the status quo. Inventorying applications, your applications and assets. Again, once you know where you're modernizing and once you know what needs to be modernized, that's almost a big battle that you're trying to win. And justifying new investment, right? Again, for everybody that's ever worked in security, budget is never enough, right? No matter what you get, it's not good enough because you need more. You need the latest, the greatest, the newest tools. But I think the successful leaders and the organizations that have been really useful in navigating this have found that you might have to find ways to balance the accounts book. So while you need, funding in one aspect of your business, you might need to find ways to balance that out. And that really brings us to the next one, right? Talking about budgets and balancing the ecosystem. AI, right? The AI catalyst. This is another big area where you start seeing major shifts in how the leaders versus non-leaders operate. And by the way, all of this can be found in a report. I can share that with the group later. So you don't have to worry about reading the specifics of this. But as you can see, the big difference between how the leaders and the non-leaders operate is their ability to use AI. You can see a huge difference there. How they're integrating AI into their ecosystem. And the other really cool one is the builders versus bystanders, right? It's when you align your decision makers to resource allocation, you almost create a self-reinforcing cycle, right? Where you have a strong foundation that allows your developers to get better, and then at the same time, the success of that justifies further investment. It's almost a self-perpetuating cycle here. And that's really the first point here, which is the AI modernization flywheel. It's so crucial because the moment you start seeing wins is when you can almost start justifying and start paying for that next new initiative that you're trying to do. And that's what leaders are successfully doing. You can see it as an example. The 93% of the leaders find that their AI efforts are positive from a revenue perspective. And that's opposed to about 50% of the non-leaders, right? And at the same time, so at the same time, 43% of the leaders think that AI development should happen before the modernization, as opposed to only 14% of the non-leaders, which means, again, you can start seeing this difference come through in how they're thinking about organizationally and how leaders operate as well. And this is another big trap that we're seeing across organizations, where somebody says, hey, you need to use AI, and it trickles down, and somebody says, okay, I have a little AI feature that's going to just tell you the weather today, right? As an example, right? You find the smallest, simplest use case, use that as a sandbox, and continue to use sandboxing methods to deploy your AI. But the idea here is that at some point, as we're starting to get into a point where AI is inevitable, you will have to dive in and start implementing actual real enterprise businesses, right? And this is obviously a much larger conversation about the actual benefits of AI in enterprises, but this is sort of a race that you can't really sit out on, right? You need to be able to be in the race, trying to build applications that are actually leveraging, that are solving business problems, and that's really moving away from the AI sandboxes and building the future with AI, right? So the leaders who are actively building applications, leveraging AI with higher with AI are seeing higher confidence levels, and this almost correlates directly into new agents, new applications that are being built. So really, the reason, the outcome of this is that when you're hiring developers, you're hiring now developers with the intent that they're not just developers, they're a 5x developer or a 10x developer, because they have the tools and they should have the access to all of the resources that can amplify their effect, right? We saw this even in real life with, I don't know if you've been following, like as an example, a few months ago, Shopify CEO put out this notice saying they expect every engineer to be leveraging AI, and if they're not, then that's actually a problem, right? And they've said, hey, every time we go out and hire, we need to see if we can get this amplified by an AI tool before we go out and hire developers. Now, obviously, there's more nuances to that conversation beyond, hey, what does that mean, leveraging AI? But the intent here is a single developer now can do significantly more than what a single developer did even 4 years ago, right? Which means the expectation is now that when you hire developers, they're doing a lot more than they were in the past. And that's also essential because historically, developers have spent less time developing and more time thinking about developing, thinking about the infrastructure needs, trying to navigate requesting for resources, managing, patching, etc. So that if you've ever been a developer, those are the least fun parts of your job, which is non-development. So how do you make sure automation is built into security, right? Going back to the other point, which is security has to be bundled into your application development, but also you want to make sure it's automated. At the same time, you want to make sure your AI infrastructure is cost effective. Again, how do you bundle platforms? How do you take advantage of open source LLM models, etc.? All of that's part of the AI piece. Secure by design, right? We talked about this. There's no more trade-offs between performance and security, right? We would never sort of be really hooked onto an application that's not reliable. And we're seeing that even with the leaders here. Over 62% of them find it quite easy to track organizational compliance levels, because that's really what leaders tend to do. And at the same time, you need to be winning battle against time. When I say battle against time, think about security patches in the past, right? Anytime there was a CVE that was discovered, the discovery of the CVE was a few weeks, months, and then you sort of patch that, which was a few weeks and months. So which meant, it was okay. You could take your time. You could find ways to, scale that up as an organization. But that's not the case anymore, right? Now, you find AI exploiting systems in real time. And you need patches and you need tools and systems that protect you in real time. So how do you ensure you do that? Is by designing systems with security in mind. So it can't be a bolt-on solution, which means, almost using the industry term, you're shifting security to the left, right? Because you're moving this into the development ecosystem. And that sort of shows up in, widening impact of security events. For leaders that don't really spend a lot of their effort thinking about security in the design phase, you're going to see that, it costs a lot to recover. It costs a lot in other aspects of it, which is if your employees are constantly recovering broken systems, nobody wants to do the job if you're a developer, right? You want to work on new products. You don't want to keep fixing things that are broken as much as, philosophy tells you to do otherwise. So key takeaways: security consolidation, security automation, extremely important. How do you also make sure you have the right trade-off between keeping systems available and also adhering to regional compliances? We talked about regional and global compliance in the past. But this is an area that's actually more, it's almost tangible in terms of the kind of effect that you can have on your application modernization journey, which is how do you ensure your developers are the most productive units of your business, right? Which is, how do you ensure the bottlenecks that every developer faces is something that the organization can fix? And here's an interesting part here, right? Which is, it almost feels neck to neck between both leaders and non-leaders here in this particular aspect, because this is a challenge that applies across the board, which is how do you get developers to spend more time on new stuff and less about maintenance and configuration, and how do they manage complexity? These are challenges across the board. So this is one of those areas where everybody's having the same level of challenge. And here's the other one, which is, should you build or should you maintain, right? And it took me a while to realize this slide here and the numbers on this, because it almost says here that a lot of the leaders are already building and are in maintenance mode when it comes to some of their really complex new use cases, while the non-leaders are still figuring out what to build, which means you would see a lot more effort from non-leaders spent in building, which is good, but the actual leaders are ahead of the curve and they've built a lot of these cases and they're iterating and maintaining and building new variations of it. And that's almost what you see here. Hello. And the other big challenge has been, an example of this conference, right? You have about 25 different vendors here who are all telling you more or less almost the same thing, which is security, AI, SASE, security, platformization, consolidation, right? Like if you were to condense that into a few words. So how do you, as a developer or an organization that supports developers, ensure that you consolidate your tech stack and you want to ensure there's a simplification of deployment, rollouts, etc. So that's another massive big challenge. And you can see that the leaders spend time on ensuring tech stacks are consolidated, right? Because, this is the industry, like, you go from decentralization, centralization, go back to decentralization. Now we're in the platformization mode where everything's getting platformized, right? So, and you can see that the leaders are spending effective time in the last 12 months thinking about consolidation. So key takeaways: platform consolidation, resilience and automation. You're starting to see a theme here, right? Which is consolidation, reducing bureaucracy, reliability and scalability. So this takes us to, what are we building for? Like, we want to ensure you're building for what's coming up next, right? And if I were to sort of summarize this into like 4 big questions and frameworks that leaders thinking about modernization can think on these lines, which is, how do you simplify organizational bureaucracy and processes, right? Which is, what process approval is slowing you down and slowing your application modernization the most? Find them. Find a commit to address this as a team, right? What sort of AI scaling do they find least efficient, right, or least effective? We're seeing this across the board. Every organization has an AI mandate. Some of them are successful, some of them are not. Some of them are focusing on developer efficiency. Some of them are focusing on operational efficiency in an organization. Not everything is going to work. So find the initiatives that don't work and have the least efficiency and find ways to iterate on that. Protection, right? What percentage of attack surface is unprotected? Again, as your developers are building new products, there are new projects, which means the attack surface of your application, your organization, your enterprise is extending beyond just, we used to have just SaaS applications and on-prem applications, but now we have agents, we have MCP servers. How do you ensure all of them continue to be supported in a unified way? That's a question as a security organization you need to keep thinking about. And the last one, which is maintenance versus building. How do you ensure your developers have the right mix of being able to build the coolest, latest, greatest, but at the same time, you're also giving a consistent, reliable experience, which means maintenance. So this is really where eventually, I want to talk about Cloudflare, the organization that I work for the folks that don't know what Cloudflare is. At any point in time, we see over 20% of the internet's traffic going through the Cloudflare platform. We run a massive global platform. And what that allows us to do is, for anybody thinking about application modernization, there isn't one step way. There isn't a single rule book or a run book that tells you how to modernize an application. You have your classic rehosting, which is your lift and shift. But how do you ensure you do that in the most efficient, the most logical way without impacting reliability, performance, scalability? Replatforming. This is almost organic at the moment because a lot of what used to be SaaS applications are now just AI agents that are running in your service cloud somewhere. How do you make sure you protect all of that and have a single unified attack surface protection? And at the same time, refactoring, right? We're seeing that actually one of the slides I forgot to mention is a lot of organizations have almost given up on modernizing existing applications. They're just said, you know what? We don't care about that anymore. We'll just build the new, coolest way of doing this. So how do you ensure refactoring of legacy applications are still scalable? And that's really where our massive network with compute, storage, security services come into play. So if anybody is interested to understand how you can do that, we have a booth there. I'm around all day. Please come by and find me. Yeah. And with that, it's lunch. Thank you.